Well, the Malaysian airliner tragedy has the potential of snowballing into a serious international crisis if it is in fact confirmed that the plane was indeed shot down by either the Ukrainian government or by Russia-backed separatists who are currently fighting in eastern Ukraine. Now, there have been claims and counterclaims from both sides, but no concrete evidence yet. A radar system reportedly spotted a heat signal around the time when the plane was hit. Investigations are on to determine the trajectory of the missile, to determine where it exactly came from. Here's a full report.
The tragic downing of MH-17 is a mystery. A mystery which has no simple answers. Till now, reports say the Boeing 777 plane crashed near Ukraine's border with Russia. A total of 298 people were on board MH-17 flying from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, all dead. The plane wreckage was found near Torres in Ukraine's Donetsk region. This region is the epicenter of a massive conflict between Ukrainian forces and pro-Russian rebels. Ukrainians believe the plane was shot down, some even calling this a terror attack. A blame game now has begun between Russia and Ukraine. Details of what led to the catastrophe are sketchy. Little is known about whether the plane was shot at, and if so, by whom. With strong denials by Russia and Ukraine, there is a possibility there could be a third force behind the downing of MH-17. Even if it was the rebels, do they have the technology to shoot down a plane flying at such a high altitude? For now, the Ukraine defense officials have confirmed that there were no Ukrainian Air Force planes flying in the air at the time of the explosion. Bureau Report, Headlines Today.
Well, in the wake of the reported downing of the Malaysian plane over Ukraine, major airlines have started avoiding the airspace. The Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, has issued a notice to pilots of US air carriers to avoid these routes. The list of companies includes Russian Aeroflot, UT Air, Transaero, German Lufthansa and Turkish Airlines. Now, following the FAA guidelines, all American airlines have also agreed to avoid the airspace over Russian-Ukrainian border. Indian carriers Air India and Jet Airways will also avoid the airspace over the war-torn eastern Ukraine following a directive issued to them by the DGCA. Now, Air France and Virgin Atlantic too have decided to temporarily reroute flights to bypass Ukraine altogether. Dubai-based Emirates airline turned around its Kiev-bound flight EK171, which returned to its base airport. Well, the Malaysian Airlines passenger jet crashed in Ukraine last evening near the country's border with Russia, killing all 295 people on board. Now, flight MH17 was en route from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur when it disappeared from the radar screens. The Ukrainian government and pro-Russian separatist rebels in eastern Ukraine immediately blamed each other for the crash. That's a report we've been putting out. The US intelligence has now confirmed that the plane was shot by a surface-to-air missile. Investigations are on, even as accusations fly thick and fast.
Mistakenly, the Ukrainian military forces shot down a Russian commercial airliner over the Black Sea.
Malaysian Airlines plane MH17 reportedly shot down over eastern Ukraine. All 298 people on board dead. Among them were mostly Dutch, Americans, Australians and British, with at least 80 children on that ill-fated plane. Scenes of devastation with burning debris and body parts spread over a wide area near the village of Grabovo at the Russia-Ukraine border. Thick black smoke billowing in an open field. The plane's flight path sourced up to the final moments before its transponder stopped broadcasting location data, showing MH17 cutting clear through the country, then exploding mid-air just 50 kilometers short of Ukraine. The world watched with shock.
This is a tragic day in what has already been a tragic year for Malaysia. As we work to understand what happened Our thoughts and prayers are with the family and friends of those on board the flight. The flight's passengers and crew came from many different countries, but today, regardless of nationality, we are all united in grief. Thank you.
Obviously, the world is watching reports of a downed passenger jet near the Russia-Ukraine border. And it looks like it may be a terrible tragedy. Right now, we're working to determine whether there were American citizens on board. That is our first priority. And I've directed my national security team to stay in close contact with the Ukrainian government. The United States will offer any assistance we can to help determine what happened and why.
It took some time.
Flying at 10,000 feet before exploding in mid-air, the plane was flying over the heavily militarized zone on the Russian-Ukrainian border. Going by the US intelligence reports, MH-17 was shot at using the Buk surface-to-air missile. Ukrainian authorities claim of Moscow's direct involvement in supporting separatist insurgents in eastern Ukraine. Moscow denying all accusations. Footage taken from the wreckage showed the charred remains of passports and suitcases scattered on the crash site. Emergency workers tackling the blazes that broke out after the crash. Scenes reminiscent of the MH-17 disaster as grieving relatives gather at airports to learn the fate of their loved ones. Loved ones they will never see. Bureau Report, Headlines Today.
Well, what an incredible story that is. Now, moving on, as Moscow-backed rebels and the Ukrainian military trade charges, there are some fresh reports that are trickling in at this point in time. An Air India flight, AI-113, was traveling barely 25 kilometers behind the MH-17 when it was hit and could have easily been the target. Also lucky was a Singapore Airlines flight that was some distance away. This is a busy airspace and countries around the world have now been advised to avoid it for the time being. Well, providential escape for passengers on board that Air India and Singapore Airlines flight. Now, meanwhile, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has called for a full, transparent international investigation into the Malaysian Airlines disaster in East Ukraine. The UN Security Council plans to hold an emergency meeting on the situation in Ukraine later today.
I regret that despite my repeated urgings and those of many regional and world leaders together, an already dangerous conflict has now escalated even further. In the past 24 hours, there have been a number of incidents involving the death of civilians. There can be no military solution to this conflict.
And as more and more details are in fact trickling in, we are getting confirmation that it was mostly Dutch nationals on board the ill-fated flight. 154 of them were Dutch. The next were Australians, Malaysians, Indonesians. There were also 6 Britons, 4 Belgians and a Canadian on board. Our hearts go out to the families of those who have lost their lives in this tragedy. While it is nothing short of a bizarre twist of fate, an Indian origin Malay, Sanjeet Singh, was a flight steward on the Malaysian Airlines flight. He had swapped flights to fly on the MH-17 that was shot down. Meanwhile, just 131 days ago, his wife, also a flight stewardess, had swapped out of the flight MH370, which then crashed. Now, while the wife has escaped death, the husband wasn't that lucky. What a twist of fate this is.